All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to another CTE webinar. Today we have Marguerite O'Brien joining us for C and Empathy. My name is Casey Carroll. I'm an instructional designer at the Center for Teaching Excellence here at USC. I will be moderating today's session. Marguerite will be leading us. I think that we're good to go. All right, Marguerite, you want to go?
Sure, great. Thank you, Casey. Good morning, everybody. Hope you're all doing well this morning and that you had a restful weekend away from work responsibilities, especially if you've been working from home, which I imagine many of you have or most of you have. So as Casey said, my name is Marguerite O'Brien. I'm the Director of Wellness Prevention and Advocacy Services here in Student Health Services for USC, and I've been at the campus for 12 years. I'm an alumna, so happy to be sort of working in a very home place for me. Feels very comfortable to be here. So some of the things, I was really thrilled when I was asked to present this workshop, even though I will say at the outset I'm no expert by any means on empathy, but I hope that today we'll share some ideas. I'll share some of the things that I've learned through research that I've done and through the work that I've been doing. One of the things that I do in student health is to work on the prevention side. So my supervisor and I, Dr. Rebecca Caldwell, we oversee prevention folks here. So it includes health educators, it includes advocates, it includes dietitians, wellness coaches, and our peer leader program, so mental health initiatives. And so some of the things that we do, she and myself and a couple of other colleagues have developed a resiliency curriculum. Some of you may have participated in that or have heard about it. We'll be rolling it out even more through HR this summer and beyond. And this was a project that was been almost 2 years in the making in terms of doing research for it. And anyway, to make a long story short, that's part of how I've gotten into this work or gotten into looking into concepts like empathy as it relates to resiliency and well-being and all of that. Another thing that I get to do in my job is to provide mindfulness work. I'm trained in mindfulness-based stress reduction. So with some of my colleagues, we also lead series on mindfulness. We also do daily guided meditation that we're doing virtually right now. So if you haven't checked into it, I'll make sure that I mention it again, or at least we'll get resources to Casey that can post when we follow up from the session. So again, I'm glad you're here with me today. I'm glad Casey's here as well, so he can pay attention to the chat, because this isn't new to me necessarily, but it sort of is in terms of navigating all the things that go on. So please feel free to raise your hand or write something in the chat to get my attention if you want to talk about something. I'm perfectly fine with us chatting throughout. So if there's something that kind of tickles your brain at a moment and you say, I don't want to lose it, you can certainly raise your hand or put a question in the chat. So let's dive in. So here's our agenda for what I'd like to do this morning. Again, we have about an hour, and that's really enough time to pretty much scratch the surface on talking about empathy and its implications for us. Because how do we provide empathy to others when we're maybe not in the greatest place either? So welcome and introductions. We've gone through it. Thanks, Casey. I'm going to check in with you in just a moment. We'll talk about what empathy is. We'll talk about what it is not. I have a couple of brief videos to show you. We'll talk about how we can express empathy when we might be struggling as well, and then wrap up by talking about how to maintain meaningful contact, connection during a pandemic. And I think sometimes I know I have to remind myself that, oh my gosh, we're living in a pandemic. That's why this thing I'm trying to do might feel particularly hard, or why this day might seem just particularly melancholy for no apparent reason. Well, it's like, we're living in a pandemic. That could be a reason. And it really is a good reason why, right? So let me ask you all this, and you can raise your hand, or you can unmute yourself and shout out or write in the chat. But I would love to know, just from a few of us, we don't have time for everyone to respond, but what's one thing that's brought a smile to your face recently? The feral cat likes leftover eggs. I'm trying to be this. Spending the weekend with family and friends. Puppies, yes. Dogs in clothes. There was one I missed that someone said, watching the birds. Oh yeah. Oh, prom tomorrow. Netflix, love it. Watching your 2-year-old play outside. Awesome. Yeah, so good. I don't know if anybody's reading novels. Yes. I don't know if anybody's come across the Some Good News that John Krasinski has been doing on YouTube or wherever he does it. Anyway, on social media, it's really a wonderful thing. It's just delightful, just all good news kinds of stories and things that he's done to help brighten people's days. But anyway, yes. So thank you for sharing those things, and I appreciate that you're able to notice things that bring a smile to your face, because it can feel really hard. Passion of people sharing their stories during 32 interviews. A fox sitting in the middle of the street like a sphinx. That's awesome. Wow. Last night, this did not bring a smile to my face. Actually, this brought terror to my entire body. And my poor dog didn't know what was happening as we went outside and we immediately turned around. I was dragging her back in. Is that I saw a snake came down my front steps, turned right down the path, and there it was like, yeah! I'm not a fan. Some of you might really like snakes. I don't. So I had to go grab my husband, who doesn't like them either, but he was a trooper and went outside to try and find it. Anyway, so there's that. Okay. We're going to move on to other things. Thank you so much. So another brainstorm. So again, you can unmute, you can raise your hand, I can call on you, or again, in the chat. This is, I would love to hear voices too, so please feel free to unmute yourself and shout out, excuse me. When you think of the word empathy, when you think about it, when you see it, what comes to mind? How would you define empathy? Putting yourself in another's shoes. Truly understanding what someone's going through. You got a yep to that. Thumbs up. Understand others' feelings. Listening, reflecting, not necessarily responding or advising. Yes, trying to imagine what someone might be dealing with. Brene Brown. Oh, yes, Caleb. We're about to go there. Yeah, absolutely. So all those things that you mentioned, I do too, Deirdre. So for some of you, this might be old news. So yes, exactly. So as many of you mentioned, empathy is the ability to see the world as others see it in a non-judgmental way, and to understand someone else's feelings and to be able to communicate that understanding. So we'll dive in a little bit deeper in a few minutes about the differences between empathy and sympathy, especially. But and some of you mentioned there's no one that does it better than Brene Brown. But I do want to just highlight for us that we're in a time when many of us are struggling in lots of different ways. Right, so we are living during a pandemic, which I say that to myself a lot. I say it out loud a lot because it's like, wow, okay, yes, this is our reality, and I don't have anybody in my life anymore that was old enough to have lived during the pandemic in 1918. I had an aunt that lived to 100, but she passed several years ago. So there's just no one that I know personally. So it's really interesting to think, oh my gosh, years from now, people are going to be reading about this pandemic and what people were doing during that time. So, all of us are having to deal with and live with it, as are our students who will be coming back to campus in August. And, as we know, we've been interacting with them throughout the spring and will throughout the summer on some level. So we're all coming from a place where we've been living through a really exceedingly difficult time, just in terms of daily life in some ways. And it's different for everyone. So that non-judgmental piece is really, I think, important, because you've probably seen this sort of thing on social media where, I don't know who originally posted it or wrote this sort of thing, but there's, all of us, yes, we are living during this pandemic, and we're experiencing it in different ways. So for some people, it's knowing where their next meal is coming from has become a really, really scary thing. For others, they're having to go to work when they maybe don't feel 100% safe going to work. So there's others that feel extremely inconvenienced by having to practice physical distancing or wearing a face cloth and things of that nature. So it's just, we're all going through this in very different ways. Can't be with loved ones, can't mourn loved ones who pass away in the ways that you're used to doing, all of those things. So like I said, and a couple of you pointed out, Brene Brown has been doing a lot of research on this, of course, over the years. And I've leaned into that research. She's informed by the work of Teresa Wiseman, who came up with these 4 defining attributes of empathy. And I have a brief video to show. It might be very familiar to some of you, but I think it really sums up what empathy is and what empathy is not. So Casey's going to cue that up for us.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. Yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
There it is. So, as Brene talked about, and as she mentioned, the research that we can, when we experience the feelings of another, because we've been in a similar place. So it is a place of vulnerability. It is a way of seeking connection because we've had a similar experience. So we're able to understand what maybe that pain feels like, or that sadness, without demeaning it or without sort of brushing it aside, where sometimes with sympathy, it can maybe feel that way. So sympathy, not that sympathy is a bad thing, but that we understand the suffering of another, we acknowledge someone's circumstances. Sometimes sympathy can also come with a side of pity, which isn't necessarily helpful. So we want to make sure that we're coming from that place of being open and honest and willing that we are open and honest, willing to listen to someone else's pain and tap into that place in ourselves that has experienced something similar, without saying to them, because human nature, right? We're listening to someone's story. They're expressing their heartfelt, and they're being open and vulnerable to us, expressing something that's going on. And maybe in the back of our minds, maybe, it's like, oh my gosh, I've been through something similar. I know exactly. And you can't wait to kind of share your piece, to hold back and sit back and listen and respond with reflection, as opposed to, oh my gosh, yeah, that's so hard. I've been through the same thing. And I know, right? I know exactly how you feel, because those words, was that 5 or 6 words, can really shut down a conversation really quickly. Maybe you all have experienced that, where someone says you're expressing a frustration, a doubt, a scariness is, I know exactly how you feel, blah, 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 blah. And then the person, how does that make you feel when someone does that to you? Maybe a couple of people can chime in about that. If you've been expressing a sadness, a hurt, maybe you lost a loved one, you didn't get a promotion, there was a breakup of a relationship. and so you're telling your best friend, or you're telling your mom or your sister or your brother or whomever, like, oh, I know exactly how you feel. This and this happened to me. It doesn't feel good, does it? So we want to make sure. Yeah, I'm doing better at asking my friends what they need from me before offering advice. Thank you. I'm seeing some chat notes come up in the chat. I appreciate. And two, a couple of people said sometimes as humans, we want to fix things for someone. We often, especially if that's your default, if you're a helper, if you're naturally a person that people go to for advice maybe, or just sometimes maybe they go to you to vent, but sometimes emotion can be uncomfortable for some of us. So when someone's giving us a lot of whatever the emotion is, it can be, especially if it's a heavy emotion, if you will, if it's sadness or depression or melancholy or grief or loneliness or whatever. It's like, this doesn't feel good to me, so I need to fix it for you, instead of just trying to sit there and be with that person. I think that video, that little clip shows really, really well. Yeah, sometimes I know how you feel can get into the feeling, but I think sometimes it's like maybe the response of, wow, this sounds really, really hard for you, or this really sounds like it sucks for you right now. It sounds like you're going through a really hard time. How can I help? Do you want to ask maybe questions in that way? Likewise, because of the work that I do with SAVIP and advocates for survivors and victims of interpersonal violence, is for things like hugs. I personally am a hugger. I'm Italian, despite my current last name. My family's Italian, so we're a bunch of huggers, passionate people, right? But I've learned, you have to ask people, and not ask in the way that puts the person on the spot, that makes them feel like I have to now reject you if I say no, if I really don't want to hug, or I'm not a hugger myself. So instead of saying, do you want a hug? How about something like, I've got a hug if needed. My hugs are free, or whatever, however you want to place it, so that the onus is not on the person to have to then reject you, because if they're kind of in a feeling icky place anyway, it's not going to really help. So as Brene says, empathy is not saying things like at least, or that I know exactly how you feel. Maybe the question is like, tell me how you sound really, really sad. Can you tell me how that feels for you right now? Or can you tell me what? There's, lots of emotions. We typically use the words that come to mind first, like sad, mad, glad, whatever, angry. But sometimes there's nuance. There is always nuance to those things. It might be disappointment. It might be frustrated. It might be, just a general sense of melancholy or malaise or whatever. So to try and see if you can help the person articulate, but again, letting them drive that train of what their story is. So what is helpful is talking through, or helping them, see that you're listening to them, affirming them, giving them validation. Sometimes when we're in the midst of something, we might feel like, I'm the only one that's feeling this way. I'm the only one that's struggling. I'm the only one who has kids at home. I'm trying to homeschool. I'm trying to do all these things, and I feel like I'm failing at it, because I'm looking on Facebook or on Instagram, and I see all these creative parents that are doing all these cool things with their kids, and I'm just having them go through worksheets. I suck as a parent, or whatever. I mean, that's just kind of a very live right now kind of thing that several of my friends have been struggling with. And so letting them know you're there to listen, letting them know that, I don't know how to help you right now, and I'm here to listen. Just maybe sometimes that's all someone needs, is to be validated. So here's this sort of continuum, if you will, about how engaging with people is the first level of sort of pity is where I acknowledge your suffering, and really sort of, I feel bad for you. Is a kind of a judgmental, in my opinion, a judgmental place to be. And then sympathies, I care about your suffering, and I really don't want you to suffer. The empathy piece, I feel your suffering, and I can tap into a place that I've been in my life that knows that sort of a feeling myself. And then compassion is where, I want to help relieve some of your suffering. So when we talk about moving into things like compassion, we need to know that when we are trying to exhibit compassion towards others, which might for many of us be a very natural thing, is to try to help someone relieve their suffering. However, the key is, when we talk about coming from an empathic place, is to do it without judgment, so that I want to help relieve your suffering in ways that will be helpful to you and in ways that don't make it feel like, and I'm not coming from this place, don't make it feel like I'm pitying you, or I think I'm better than you, or I'm judging you in any way, shape, or form. So to really, dig into that. And one of the ways to get there in terms of providing self-compassion or exhibiting compassion towards someone is to really have some compassion towards oneself. Sometimes that's hard to do. Sometimes for some of us, it's really, yes, really hard to tap into that. One of our participants, thank you, just mentioned about the ability to mirror. And, as humans, we do that. We mirror other people's emotions. We mirror other people's mood state, if you will. I've dabbled a little bit in neuro-linguistic programming years ago in studying that a little bit, and about how we really do begin to mirror people, their actions as well as just their mood state. So, and probably we've all experienced this, or most of us have experienced this, where you have someone in your life, when they enter a room, the room just immediately lights up, and the mood or the atmosphere in the room just sort of lifts. There's a little bit of a happiness there. Also, there's folks in our lives perhaps who are the opposite, where they walk into a room and the energy gets sucked out of the room, or you pass them in the hallway and you wonder, they don't say a word at all. Either person doesn't have to say a word. You can just sense and feel where they are. And sometimes, so that person, you're like, oh gosh, I'm staying away from Marguerite today. I just can't, I don't know what's going on, but I can just tell. I just want to stay away from her. So how does that, we emote maybe unconsciously or subconsciously, that what's happening is kind of coming out of us, and so we're affecting the people around us, and we're able, then sometimes we mirror that. Sometimes if you're confronted with, and by confront I don't mean like a confrontation, like a fight, but if you come upon someone who's got that negative energy, sometimes you also start to put out that negative energy. But if you do the flip, and if you're with someone or you yourself put out that positive energy, even a smile. So there's research on happiness that's been Siegelman's work and others that Dr. Sood, like when you smiling at someone elicits that back, because we do have that in our brain, that the neurology in our brain, and that doctor just mentioned, that is that we will mirror that. We're going to mirror, almost mimic what we see. So if you smile at someone, it's going to make a difference versus whether you're frowning at someone or have a scowl on your face, because that can affect. Just notice the next time you're in a meeting in person with people that you can see sitting around a room. We'll get back there someday, that you can actually see facial expressions, because it's a bit harder in these Zoom and other encounters, in Teams and Blackboard Collaborate and all that. So I think it's really important to think about that, and to look into, when we think about compassion, having compassion for others, think about our own selves. When our, sort of our psychic cup is full, we're more able to give out to others. When we're feeling depleted energetically, it's really hard to be there for others, to give to others. It might be more likely than if I'm feeling somewhat drained and someone comes to me with, just wanting to talk about an issue that they have going on, I might not respond in the most empathic way. That might be the day that I'm like, oh my gosh, I know exactly how you feel, or, oh really? Let me tell you about what's happened with me. So that way, if I respond that way, I kind of like, it's my self-check. Okay, Marguerite, you're not in a good place. You're feeling a little bit depleted. So how do we boost you up? Well, one of the ways is to work on our own internal self-compassion, to be able to be kind and compassionate to others. And here I rely on the work of Kristen Neff, Dr. Kristen Neff, which many of you may be familiar with as well, and talking about the constructs of self-compassion. And that's self-kindness versus self-judgment. So again, just like we don't want to judge someone else when we're expressing empathy towards them, we also don't want to judge ourselves. So being kind to ourselves, sometimes it's really hard for our folks. We all, I think, or most of us, I try to not speak in generalizations, I've done it a couple of times, so many of us have voices in our heads such that there's a a tape, if you will, or an MP3 that plays in our heads over and over. So we've worn tracks or ruts in our brains of the thoughts that float into our heads when things happen. Maybe when things don't go right, maybe when we've made a mistake, maybe when we had a failure or a setback. We hear in our mind's eye a voice. It might be our own voice. It might be the voice of a parent or guardian or someone from our growing up years, our developing years. And many times that voice is not a positive voice. It's very judgmental. It's very off-putting. And when we keep listening to that voice, we believe those things about ourselves. And it's really hard to be compassionate towards ourselves when we make a mistake. And maybe sometimes, taking to some extreme levels, and also we might feel like we don't have a sense of that we can be successful or that we'll ever be successful because we're constantly chasing something and we keep hearing that voice in our head that we're not good enough and we're not trying hard enough or whatever the case may be, or comparing ourselves to others. So there's all these different thinking traps, we call them, that we can fall into. So learning or unlearning that, learning how to speak kindly to ourselves, really goes a long way in helping us to be compassionate towards others. Although I will say for many of us, it's very easy to be compassionate towards other people and not towards ourselves. So we also have to work on ourselves. The other constructs of self-compassion are common humanity versus isolation. We can very often feel like, I'm the only one. I'm struggling with this. Nobody else feels this way. Or, I just got this promotion. I don't even belong here. Like they're going to find out one day that I don't really belong here. You have that imposter syndrome, or you just think like I'm the only person struggling right now with what's going on in the world. And it's not true. We have a common humanity for whatever is going on. We're all of us at some point in time in our life will experience a loss of some kind, death of loved ones, pets, relationships that break up, all that sort of thing. And right now, we are living in a time of collective loss of all kinds of things. We have lost the lives that we've known for our entire lives. So the way that things were does no longer exist. And like I mentioned earlier at the beginning, we are all living during a time of pandemic. We're living through this pandemic, and we're all experiencing in slightly different ways, but we're not alone in it. We are all experiencing life in a different way. It has changed. Today is different than yesterday, and will be different from tomorrow. So the more we can kind of live in this current moment and realize that we are not alone, we might be lonely, we are not alone in this, so we can start to normalize and validate our own feelings and maybe even start to reach out or accept a reach out from somebody else. The other constructs are mindfulness versus over-identification. So when we over-identify, especially with those negative feelings, we kind of feel like, things will always be this way. This life is hard right now and it sucks and I'm not really being successful at anything I'm doing, and this is the way I am, versus just being able to sit with that difficult emotion, that discomfort, that dis-ease, if you will, and realize that everything is impermanent. That sounds very trite, but this too will pass. And this too will pass, and the impermanence it takes time. So, and not like tomorrow will be such a better day. Well, it could be, it might not be, but we will not always be living in the way that we are living right now. Everything will morph and change. And so if we can be able to sit with and just notice where those difficult emotions might be coming from, and where that we can sit with them with equanimity, with some self-compassion, without judgment, just noticing what's going on in our lives, we can also help our students do that as well. That they are not alone, that they are, yes, experiencing some really difficult times right now. When they come back, one thing to think about too is when they come back, this class of incoming students has had a very different spring semester than any other, for students that are coming out of high school, than any other group of high school graduating seniors has had, right? So they've been experiencing resiliency. They've been resilient in ways that others maybe hadn't had a chance to be before they entered college, if they're that sort of traditional age, if you will. So that's something to help our students tap into when they come to us and when they're talking with us about how things are hard or challenging, and just to remind them of their strengths, to bring that up as a conversation about, well, talk to me a little bit about what your senior year in high school was. What was your prom like? Someone mentioned that their daughter's having their prom tomorrow. Imagine it in some sort of virtual way. So to really help them tap into that, and then maybe tap into it in yourself, that you have been able to do things in a different way and maybe have managed to navigate your life in ways that you maybe never thought possible, or learning things that you maybe have never thought that you would learn. All these opportunities that we've all had to experience, different webinars, different learning, different training that we've been able to do, is maybe something different than you've done before. So giving yourself some credit for trying some different things. It could be just that you tried a different recipe. You played a new game with your family. You tried Zoom for the first time. You had a virtual meetup with friends in a virtual space. All these kinds of things that we've learned to do differently. The thing too about self-compassion is that it really does tap into, it dovetails with the empathy piece, because the ability to show empathy and to be compassionate really has to start from within as well. Because eventually, if we keep giving out of our bank, then we get depleted energetically, and then we're unable to provide that for others, if that's something that you identify as someone who is a helper, who some people go to for advice and for comfort. But we get to a point when we're depleted, we can't even give that to ourselves. It's really hard to give to others. And then oftentimes I have found with myself that then the negative thinking traps that I fall into become a little bit more prominent when I get into those places and spaces. So to really sort of think about that as we go on. I've got another video to show, and this one is about self-compassion as a piece. And this one really taps into how some of us are more able to give compassion to others before ourselves, and what that negative self-talk could sound like.
You are too dark.
You are not good enough.
You are worthless.
You are not that pretty.
And you are the ugly twin.
Would you feel comfortable reading out what you just read to me to your sister, but as if it was about her? Hey, how's it going?
Hi.
We're so quick to judge or be unkind to ourselves. I think we sometimes forget how harmful that can be. So I want to dive straight into it. Define in your own words what self-esteem is to you.
The way I feel about how the world views me.
If you look yourself in the mirror and you're happy with what you see,
You just have to know that you're important and that you matter.
How much confidence you have.
The way that you personally carry yourself around in life.
Tell me about some moments in your own life where you've struggled with self-esteem.
I have an identical twin. She's smaller than me. She doesn't have a gap in her teeth. So I kind of grew up comparing myself to her. I lose a lot of my self-esteem there, and I shouldn't, because she's my best friend. Like, she would never put anything wrong on me. There's nothing on her there, but that's where I lose my self-esteem.
Yeah. What I'd love for you to do now is I'd love for you to think about some of the thoughts you've had that have negatively affected your self-esteem. And actually what I want you to do is write it down here.
okay.
And just write down the voice that you've heard in your head of a thought or something you've said out loud to yourself when you've had that experience of negative self-esteem.
Okay.
And take your time, no rush at all.
I think I'm done.
Yeah? You all right? If you feel comfortable, do you mind reading them out to me?
Okay, you are too dark. You are too tall. You are too touchy. And you are not like the rest of us.
You are not good enough. You are not as good as your friends or your sisters.
You are scared. You are worthless. You are unimportant.
You are not that pretty. You are not ready. You are unloved.
You are not skinny enough for that shirt. You're not smart enough to go to that college. And you are the ugly twin.
And how does it make you feel when you read that?
Sad.
You okay? Yeah? Yeah, we can be so harsh on ourselves sometimes. We judge ourselves so badly. And I'm sure when you're reading that, it's so harsh to hear it as well.
It's hard, actually. Yeah. You know, we're so busy saying it in our heads, and it's so normal there. But when you like physically verbalize it, it gets a lot scarier.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really painful when we say that to ourselves. You all right? I wanna do something. Just wait there. Hey, Lauren, you gotta come with me. Okay. Yeah. You okay? Yeah. Ready? Awesome. Gonna make her feel better.
Yeah.
I've got someone I want you to meet.
Oh gosh. Oh my gosh. Hi, sweetie. Hi.
Oh, I love that. How long have you been doing that for?
Forever. A while. It's been a while.
I love that. That's awesome. So we just had a really important but tough conversation, and you were sharing some things with me. Would you feel comfortable reading out what you just read to me to your sister, but as if it was about her?
No, I can't do that.
No, I'm not gonna do that.
No. Definitely not.
Why would you not?
Because it's just not very nice to say to someone. Not at all.
It's crazy, right?
Yeah.
Like, we would never say those things to the person we love, but we say them to ourselves all of the time.
Yeah.
And so you actually wrote some things about your sister, right? And I'd love for you to read them out to her. Does that sound all right?
I wrote, you are beautiful, you are smart.
You are creative, you are talented, and you are brave.
You are determined. You are inspirational, and to me especially.
You are inspiring to me. That's why I copy what you do or want the same things you may have sometimes.
You are my best friend in the world, and you are the best person that I know. Still.
Well, I mean, ever since we were little, I wanted to be you. I copied everything you did, and you're kind of like my best friend all the time.
God, Lauren.
And you're just my teacher about everything. You show me what to do when I get older and what to do now.
Oh, gosh. The saying goes, treat others like you want to be treated. But perhaps we got it all backwards. Maybe the expression should say, treat yourself with the same love and respect you want to show others.
I love you. I love you too, sis.
Any comments about that? I'm in my fields watching that. Yeah, agreed. No, I know how they couldn't share at the end. Yes, I cry. I've seen this several times because we use it in our resiliency series project, and I definitely cry every time that I watch it. Yeah, so it's hard. Why is it so hard for many of us to say nice things to ourselves and about ourselves? It's probably a whole another webinar, but yeah, I think it goes back to some of the things we've heard. Yeah, absolutes are hard. Yeah, it goes back to the things maybe we heard as children. We compare ourselves to others sometimes. Yeah, we often, and there was just so much, there was a lot of pain and shame in what those girls were sharing about themselves. We integrate and believe the negative way more. I don't know if we're wired that way. We have a couple of physicians on the call on this. They might be able to say that. The interesting thing too, someone mentioned about critique, like a lot of us we get trained, right? Well, I think as human beings, first of all, our nature is to look for what's different so we can be safe. And then as we've evolved, we haven't needed it as much, but we still have that tendency to look for the negative, and very often we look for the negative in our own selves more than or as much as in others. So, but we're able to see the positive connections. We're able to help draw that out in others when they come to us with whatever it is, especially when we're working with students. We're trying to draw on their strengths, help them see their strengths, help them realize that, okay, just because you get a C or a grade that you didn't expect on this paper or test or whatever, doesn't mean your college career is over. It doesn't mean that you're not smart. It doesn't mean that you're not capable of doing the work, all those sorts of things. But sometimes we do the flip to ourselves. We don't do as well as we expected in something, and we tell ourselves we are not enough. We don't belong here. We don't have what it takes, kind of thing. So it's really, really a tricky thing. It's important, though, to help to realize what our own triggers are and to reframe those triggers. So to see if we can flip the switch or flip the verbiage, flip the conversation in our mind. If we have a thinking trap that says, I can't do this, maybe it's I'm learning. I'm trying something new, so I'm going to give myself some grace to learn a new thing. Yes, Casey mentioned in academia, we also, yes, it's about criticism, and it's not to say you can't get feedback. It's not to say to make, that whole idea of that feedback sandwich. I'm kind of going down a rabbit hole here, but that feedback sandwich, people like, okay, you're going to tell me something not good, something good, something not good, something good, whatever. Like people maybe don't pay attention to that. But if we can give someone really constructive feedback, it's helpful. The feedback that isn't helpful is the feedback that tears us down only, because then I don't learn. If all I hear is what I did wrong, I'm going to keep internalizing that, and then I won't be able to fix anything because I might not know how, and I might not feel confident enough to ask the question, well, what could I have done differently? Because I really don't know how. I can't see myself out of this, kind of briar patch, if you will. I wanted to touch for a moment on loneliness. Just because we also, right now we're very connected virtually more than ever. But even it is still a lonely time. And I leaned into the research by Dr. Vivek Murthy, who's the former Surgeon General, who's done a lot of research on the negative health consequences of loneliness. And he talks about how our social health is at risk. We have all different dimensions of wellness and health, and our social health is at risk because, how do we strengthen social connection, even though it might seem like, oh my gosh, I can't get away from being connected? Well, are we being really connected on deeper levels? So maybe it might be things, intentionally spending time with people each day, whether it's got to be virtually or the people that in your lives that live with you, maybe sending someone a letter, writing someone a note. How often do you get something in the mail, like a note in the mail, other than maybe a bill or something, even if you get those anymore, instead of virtually? When you are with people, to be there, be fully there, present, as instead of checking your phone all the time or all that kind of thing, like being really connected with someone. Being in service to others, doing whatever that you can do. And many of us have been doing that during this time, or we do that in our lives anyway. But when we are in service to others, it connects us to our greater purpose and our value. There's also a Dr. Susan Cain who wrote the book about introverts called Quiet. Talked about how we all have different needs. So, extroverts, maybe don't do well when being physically isolated for too long. And even all the times we're connected through, we have, all these meetings in virtual spaces, it's still weird because you're not able to look someone in the eye. We miss that human connection. You might be looking at a screen or in a camera, but that's really not looking a person in the eye. And an introvert might feel lonely in a sea of strangers. So might be in these virtual spaces and still feeling very lonely. So everybody needs connection on different ways. It really depends on the frequency and intensity and pace, and how much of it we need depends on each of us, really. Some of us really prefer a lot of alone time to do things that are meaningful to us. Others prefer a lot of interaction and Many of us fall within the middle of that. So I did want to just touch on loneliness for just a moment, really quickly there. And I can send, there's a slide at the end with resources, and I can send actually a link to Dr. Kristen Neff's research on self-compassion. She has a scale that you can take to see where you kind of fall on amid all those constructs. So if you're interested, I can share that with Casey and them to share out with you all. All right, so we've talked for a little bit. Wait a minute, Marguerite. I'm raising my own hand over here. What if I'm struggling too? Like, I'm really having a hard time with all living in this pandemic, with trying to be the best that I can be in all these different ways. For many of you working from home who are also parents or caregivers to children or older adults, all of the roles that we play, or many of the roles that we play in our lives, are being played out simultaneously. Whereas, get up, you do your thing at home before you go to work, you're at work, you do your things at work before you go back home, you're back home, you do your home. So, and you go out with friends or family, you do these things, you run, you work out, you exercise, you read, you do all these different things, you go to plays. But right now, like if you're working from home with other people that you're caring for, especially pets, whatever, all those roles are seemingly happening at the same time. And it's a lot. It's a struggle. I feel for y'all. And I applaud you all that are doing that, because I don't know how. And I think for those of you that are in that space, to give yourself the grace and the credit for doing it without comparing yourself. So here's some ways, here are some tips for like taking care of self if you're struggling, is limit your social media consumption, especially if it makes you feel inadequate, especially if you're comparing yourself to those people are like, I just made a gourmet meal. Wait, I don't cook. What's going on? It's okay. Like, just turn it off. Don't limit your consumption to that if it makes you feel bad about yourself. Also, limit your news consumption. I will say that at the very beginning of this, every day I was checking that worldometer or worldometer with the tallies of the coronavirus around the world, and it was ticking up and up, and then Spain, and then China, and then Spain, and then the United States, and I was doing it every single day, and I realized, wait a minute, I was like feeling a general sense of malaise or just unease, and I stopped doing that one thing. I don't check it all the time. I get the news plenty of times, and I try to limit that news consumption as well. So limit that if that's becoming a stressor for you, or if you feel like you can't, oh my gosh, I can't manage without knowing. Well, you know what, you'll get the news, you'll get the information. Connect with nature, connect with other humans and pets. Try to let go of the attachment to the way things were, because they are not that way. We are in the present moment. Today is the way it is. Tomorrow will be a little bit different, and try to be in that moment. And try and see if you can let go of attachments to any shoulds. I should be doing this. I should have taken a course on XYZ. I should have, I've seen these things on Facebook as well. If you're wasting your time in the pandemic and haven't learned a new skill or started a new side job, excuse me, in the gig economy, then you've been waiting. No. Pay no attention to that kind of stuff. Be the best that you can be. Live your life. What I want to do quickly, as we're running out of time, and I apologize, is to talk about your self-care strategies. And one thing I want to do specifically is to ask you just a few seconds, like 30 seconds, is to think about, reflect for a moment, and jot down, if you have got a piece of paper with you or just in your phone or in your mind's eye, what is one thing that you are grateful for in this moment? And if something came to your mind or your heart really quickly, thank you for, but anything anybody wants to float up there in the chat. Because expressing gratitude, thank you. Expressing gratitude is a way to really reset that internal critic, to reset your mood, to reset your attitude, is to, expressing gratitude for self and others, and to self and others, looking at something. So trying to make gratitude expression part of your self-care. That really taps into our happiness. Again, I referenced the research of Dr. Sood about expressing gratitude. And other things that you do, maybe a couple of people can pop into the chat what you do for self-care. And it might be very different than what you did pre-pandemic. Things that you're doing for self-care. I will note that I regularly exercise, I practice yoga, meditation. health of my wife, myself, and our fur kids. Yes, love our fur babies. My fur baby is 17, and so she's geriatric, and she's just delightful. And we are grateful for every moment we have with her because we don't know. Changing at pH, brushing teeth, and applying skincare. Yes, taking care of fur kids. Yes, yes, yes. Sometimes getting out of bed and brushing your teeth is the win for the day. And that's okay. That is absolutely okay. A couple of reminders here on this slide. So on the left-hand side is the reminders of what empathy is about, seeing through others' eyes, being non-judgmental, understanding others' feelings, communicate that understanding, and then the self-compassion, self-kindness versus self-judgment, common humanity versus isolation, and mindfulness versus over-identification. That went very, very quickly, so thank you. Questions, comments, be happy to answer anything in the little time we have remaining. There is a final slide about resources, and as I said, I'll share that self-compassion scale with Casey to share out. Also the work of Dr. Sood, whom I've mentioned. We also, as I said, we're running a resiliency project. We'll be, you'll see through HR, professional development, that we've got 3 of the series coming up this summer for faculty and staff. And so it's a 4-part series. Some of the concepts we've talked about today, you'll hear about as well. And the first session, they start next week, the week of June 1st, which is next week, believe it or not. So there's that as well. So I'm going to turn it back over to Casey. Thank you all very much for coming this morning. I really appreciate it. You taking the time out.